Hi, folks. You know, I don't mean this to be a lengthy video, so we'll see how long it takes. But I do want to go ahead and just briefly look at the Trump-Vance charts and the Harris chart. When there was this whole conversation and discussion, now, first and foremost, my channel is not a political predictions channel. So if this is not your cup of tea, that's fine. I think right now it's astrologically somewhat interesting. It's an astrologically interesting time, and even yesterday when I was doing the weekly overview, it was hard not to get fixated. Part of the reason why I'm thinking about this, and it's going to come up when I do the full moon in Taurus video anyway, is because 2016, the presidential election, was an important milestone for me as an astrologer. I think I've said this to you guys before, because I really, the politics was not necessarily, and looking at birth charts of political leaders or anybody for that matter was not really a pastime of mine. I was more preoccupied at that time with just kind of carrying on and doing my readings and stuff like that. But I remember the morning of the election looking at the Clinton and Trump charts and just being befuddled at the prevailing. And if you remember the day in 2016, it was nobody conceived of, nobody talked about a Trump victory. And I remember looking at the charts, and it was the first time when I thought, this doesn't make, everyone's saying this, but between the two charts, Trump's is the stronger chart right now. Now, that was the time when I really started to think about the astrology of when the presidential elections happen, and the fact that they occur in November, and the fact that they can have some sort of a correlation with, not always precisely. I mean, in this case, there's a difference between November the 5th and November the 15th, 16th, when the full moon occurs. But the bottom line is, for someone like a Trump, that full moon occurs in his 10th house. And for someone like Biden, for example, it occurs in his 6th house of service and work. For someone like Harris, the full moon in November occurs in her 12th house, which is hardly a place, at least for now, of peaking publicly. Now, there are different, and when the whole Harris-Biden thing occurred over the summer, I think, when he was no longer running or thinking of not running, or pressure was being put on him, or at least that was the story we were being told, and Harris was coming in, that was the first time when I really was like, looked at the charts. And so now, because the 2016 election was, for me privately, such a marker for me in developing my own confidence for being able to look at some, I remember that day so distinctly. I was just like thinking that and then letting it go, because the prevailing wisdom, of course, was which way the day was going to go. And by the end of the day, I was just like, oh my God, that was right. Clinton's is comparatively the weaker chart right now, and Trump's is the stronger chart. This was in 2016. With the contest with Biden, as I said in November, and it's not just the full moon, you have to look at where the eclipses are. The eclipses were no longer, also I think Trump's eclipses in 2016, I'm not going to go back and look at that. They were, the videos that I did 2 videos around the time, maybe it was June, July. You can always just scroll down my video list and find them if you want. You don't have to go back and find them if that's not of interest to you. From my perspective, those videos were rambly again, because again, there was this dissonance between what I was seeing in the charts and the dissonance with regard to whether Trump could even get reelected or not a second time around. But it wasn't, again, I think I remember very distinctly saying, both the videos, the one I posted them successive days, because I was trying to just make sense of things. It's been such a bizarre ride this year. And I said, it's not a slam dunk, and it was being again positioned as a slam dunk. However, and then it was so interesting on the 15th of July, when Mars conjuncted Uranus and Algol in Trump's 10th house, and you had that kind of assassination attempt. And it was for, again, it was a push into prominence, let's just put it that way, during a campaign that had been all over the place on both sides. On both sides. Sometimes visible, sometimes not quite so visible, sometimes confident, sometimes unconfident, sometimes coherent, sometimes, just bizarre. So as I approach a full moon in Taurus in an election year, I can't not. It's just based on my own work and what I was doing and what I've been thinking, what I've been looking at. It's hard for me to not look at charts. And so if we're gonna talk about these charts, really, I think what we can get personally from it to some extent is how these things might apply to our own charts, so the full moon, etc. There's going to be a separate full moon video. So this is an anomaly for me. I don't spend a lot of time at all in this kind of work. And so in the interest of just getting to the point and brevity, let me just say this. As far as November is concerned and heading towards November the 22nd or so is concerned, because as I've mentioned to you, after the 22nd, there's an energetic shift as Mercury starts to go retrograde on the 26th of November. And both Trump and Harris have Mercury direct in their birth charts, to the best of my ability. With Vance's chart, and I'm going to consider Vance because again, there's all this talk about will Trump make it? Is something going to happen? Blah, 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 blah. Is Vance going to be the next president sooner rather than later, etc.? So I was just like, in Vance's case, it's hard to, the charts that actually have a birth time make him, like Trump, a Leo rising. And there are other charts out there that don't have a birth time that, there's no point looking at. And even in his chart, give me 1 second, let me just see. Mercury, is it retrograde or direct? Thank you. Magnifying glass. Sorry, why is it so complicated to find Mercury on this chart? Here we go. It's direct. Sorry, again, I'm apologizing because I don't want y'all to be like, what is he doing? Planets. Yeah, it's direct. Okay, at least to the best of my ability. So forward movement till the 22nd for people who have Mercury direct in their birth charts. Even till 23rd, 24th possibly, but on the 26th, Mercury goes retrograde till December 15th. If the energy of November is conclusive, then the election is a done deal. If we're following some sort of arc that takes us to the middle to the end of April to the end of the first week of June, then as time goes on, Harris's chart does get stronger. Even the full moon in Gemini in December, the full moon in Capricorn in January are in stronger and more assertive places and more visible places than the full moon in the 12th house. Now, the full moons don't have to be the only indicator, but part of the reason why I'm saying that the charts become stronger is that she's at this point where the eclipses, the North Node eclipses, are starting to move from the 11th to the 10th house, and they've already started that process. And middle of July, July 17th, week before, week after, September 17th, week before, week after, September 17th is when she had the first of her 10th house eclipses. When the eclipses start to move into the 10th house, the North Node eclipses, it becomes important for someone to avail of career-related opportunities and to aim for some sort of peak and to expect that some sort of peak is attained. But the actual experience of the jobs and the work, as with many things associated with the North Node, provide a certain satisfaction, but at the same time introduce an element of discontent. So the archetypal examples that I give, when the North Node eclipse is moving into the 10th house and transiting the 10th house, is someone who's always wanted to be a CIO, becomes a CIO, but hates the politics. And the discontent when the North Node eclipses start to move into the 9th house is what fuels someone to say, you know what, this is what I would like to do next. So it creates, the North Node eclipses going over the 10th house creates this weird bifurcation. On the one hand, you're getting experiences that do push you into the limelight and that do allow you to check certain experiences off your list. I wanted this, I got this. I wanted these kinds of experiences, I got them. But there's something that gets introduced also that makes you feel like, oh, I can now experience what this is like, and I can tell what I like about it, what I don't like about it. And then when the North Node eclipses move into the 9th house, for Harris starting in 2026, a person says, you know, for example, I wanted to be a CIO, I got it, I hate the politics, I've always wanted to form a startup, so I'm going to go do that next. And the chart keeps moving. People may come into the 10th house North Node eclipses thinking they're going to reach a destination, but the chart and spirit and the universe is like, there's no destination. You're going to get certain things, you're going to get certain things you desire, you're going to get a certain amount of prominence, but the chart is going to keep moving. The fact that the North Node eclipses for Harris are moving, especially by the time we get past the first 6 months of next year, into the North Node eclipses going into the 10th house more decisively and the South Node into the 4th, could give us pause for anyone who's thinking about a narrative of, well, the election happened, is anything about it going to get questioned or reviewed or something along those lines? It's not decisive. Here's the when some things happen and you have Mercury direct in your birth chart and they happen prior to Mercury going direct, there's every reason to believe that every inch gained is going to be kept. And whatever develops, because there is a narrative with those North Node eclipses that takes us to the end of the first week of June of next year, is going to be built on that certainty that takes us to about November 22nd or thereabouts. But there's also the possibility, there's no question about it, there's also the possibility that where we are is only a pit stop to really feeling stable by the time we get to mid to end April to the end of the first week of June. Now, this could mean that the election is decisive, conclusive, and for everybody involved, including the president-elect, in this case, Donald Trump, a certain kind of stability is not completely attained until the end of the first week of June as well. And the same holds true for Harris and the same holds true for Vance, as it holds true for all of us to some extent. And very shortly, starting November the 26th, we are all going to enter a period from November the 26th to the middle of April, where we are in one retrograde after another. As I've said, since September, October, we have entered this kind of birth canal. But now, after November the 26th, we really enter we enter the heart of the hurricane of change. It doesn't have to be tumultuous for all of us. One of the things I've been saying more and more recently, because we are in the shadow of the South Node solar eclipse in Libra, October 2nd, December 2nd, week before, week after, will play an important role in that. It involves releasing a status quo, and a status quo that is stagnant, that used to be a comfort zone, that is still a comfort zone, but rather than being fruitful, may now lead to loss. And there are two solutions. Either you revitalize that comfort zone so it becomes more fruitful, or else you release it. And it's going to be different strokes for different folks within that arena. Those people who are revitalizing may experience change, of course, to revitalize what needs to be revitalized, but it may not be as dramatic as it might be for those people who actually have to release something. So not everyone, this birth canals doesn't have to be where we end up. There's still a journey that takes us through a Mercury retrograde, a Mars retrograde, another Mercury retrograde, and a Venus retrograde by the time we're out of it all, by the middle to end of April of next year. And then we get to stabilize till, and because in this case we're talking about three people who have Mercury direct in their birth charts, the March 29th eclipse, they're not really going to feel the impact of that March 29th solar eclipse in Aries until Mercury is direct in the middle of April, and as Mercury starts to gather speed and heads towards the end of the first week of June. Now, where are these eclipses occurring for these people? We know where the full moons are occurring. And the full moon in 2024 is conjuncting Uranus, trining Pluto, and conjuncting Algol. For Trump, this is in his 10th house, and it is conjuncting his natal midheaven. In Harris's case, it is in her 12th house. In Trump's case, Pluto is just getting ready to be done with his transit of Trump's 6th house. So since 2008, Pluto has transformed, or tried to transform, his work, his job, and his self-care. Now, I can't talk very much to his self-care and his health, but when I see Pluto going over the 6th, it seems impossible to me, or very difficult for me, that Pluto has not given a client for whom Pluto has been transiting the 6th since 2008 strong signs of what to reform. The right kind of rest, the right kind of movement, the right kind of diet. I don't know Donald Trump. I can't talk to that. But the work transformation since 2008, for those of us who've been following the public life, makes sense. Transforming how you're spending your days. I know that for myself as a Leo rising person, 2008 was the year when I wanted to stop working a corporate job and wanted to move in the directions that were more important to me. I wasn't able to make that transition until 2011. But since then, there has been no going back. Right, wrong, good, bad, indifferent. And from a health perspective, enough has happened that has made me think about, well, what can I eat now? How much rest do I need? What do my days need to look like? Blah, 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 blah. And it's a question I would ask anyone with a Leo rising as far as this, and Pluto's finishing up his transit on the 19th, and the full moon in Taurus is trining, is saying, all right, let's finish this transformation. Now, Pluto for us is going to enter, for Leo rising folks, is going to enter the 7th house, Aquarius, after the 19th. And there, things, partners, partnerships. Here's the deal. Let's just look at Trump's chart first, and then we look at Harris's chart next, because if I keep jumping between charts, it's going to get really confusing. The North Node eclipses in Trump's chart are moving from the 9th house to the 8th house. The eclipses moved into the 9th house from March, April of 2023. And that's the arc he's following all the way to the end of the first week of June of 2025. The North Node eclipses were in his 10th house August, September 2021, all the way to October 23. Technically, Trump should be in a place where he's thinking about what does he want to do next in a heartfelt way? Where does he want to go next? What is intriguing for both him and Vance is that the North Node eclipses are slipping into and moving into as 2025 proceeds into the 8th house. And both of them have Saturn and Neptune going over the 8th house. In Trump's case, Saturn over the 8th house is clear to see with some of the massive fines and fees and legal issues that he's had to deal with. If you have Saturn going over your 8th house and you're dealing with legal trouble, the last thing you want to do is show up to court and act out or be abusive to a judge. And so what he's been seeing is very sort of classic Saturn going, if you don't behave, here's more, here's more, here's more. And so Saturn in the 8th, which you would expect would increase expenses and money owed to others if you are not acting responsibly and not sorting out legal, financial, emotional consequences of being tied to others, whether through marriage or family or impersonally to tax organizations or creditors or debtors, or then Saturn, as I said, Saturn is saying, stabilize the 8th house. And one way to stabilize the 8th house is to acquire a position of power, to figure out what you can do to manage that part of the chart. That said, it is hardly a transit of eclipses that is going into a place of greater prominence. When the North Node eclipses move into the 8th house, people can look for investors. They can look to form boards. You remember that example I gave you about someone who, when the North Node eclipses move into the 9th house, says, I'm done being a CIO, I hate the politics, I'm going to form my own startup. They explore that, and as the North Node eclipses move into the 8th house, they start to look for investors, venture capitalists, partners, partnerships. Sometimes when the North Node eclipses move into the 8th house from the 9th house, a person can literally move in with family, move in with their parents, move in, rely on spouse's income, rely on severance, unemployment to correct their income. Because the South Node eclipses are happening in the 2nd house, something around the way that income is generated needs to be corrected, right-sized. One way to look at it is that as we get to January to March, because the first of the South Node eclipses in Trump's 2nd house occurs on March the 17th, I believe, 13th or 17th or something like that, is that between January and March, he has to release a job. And he has to lean into the 8th house in order to rely on partners, investors to support him as he corrects the direction that he is going to move in. For both Trump and Vance, the focus is moving eclipse-wise, and you cannot ignore the eclipses, and you cannot ignore Saturn, and you cannot ignore Jupiter. Jupiter, after June the 9th, for both of them, moves into the 12th house. The curtains close, and they're working behind the scenes. Saturn is saying, stabilize the 8th house, stabilizing what you owe, what is owed to you, what has been nebulous, what has been confusing, what has been all over, where have things been Neptunian, messy in the 8th house. I mean, is there something here about financial realities for Trump that we're not completely clear about, that even go back to 2012 and reach some sort of peak or crisis or something in 2014, 15, and 16, 17, that he has been trying to manage or stabilize? Certainly with Saturn coming in since March 2023, you have to look at a chart from the client's perspective. You could say that he has been trying to stabilize it based on some of the stuff that he's been trying to do, but he's also been, Saturn going over. The other thing with Saturn going over the 8th, when you're looking at someone's age, 8th house is the house of death and transitions. And Saturn going over the 8th, when you're past a certain age, you can't not look at it and go, where's this going? I will tell you one thing about mortality, though. It's not that straightforward. I have looked at charts, I have looked at this, that, or the other. There are certain things that I'm more comfortable saying. I mean, I know, and I read books by astrologers, and particularly one astrologer who's specialized in the astrology of when people transition, and he predicted when he was going to die, and he was wrong. I think there's certain things, my friends, we are not going to be given. You can do your best. You can consult every psychic in the world. You can look at your chart upside down. You can consult the tarot. You are not going to be sent a telegram of what is going to happen to you before it happens. You are not. That is not the way life works. And there will be things that will surprise you. There will be things that will come from left field. And what your chart is saying about your reality and how it is reflecting your reality and how it denotes opportunities and how it denotes next steps is going to be a source of constant surprise. Sorry about that. My cat has been trying to pass a hairball. He's been given the hairball medicine. He's old now, so he has these moments of sort of hairball preparation, and then of course he's able to get rid of them. I'm hoping that it doesn't have to be gotten rid of that way, considering he's been given the medication and comes out the other way. Enough said. So while Trump's chart has a strength in October, as time goes on, until Jupiter enters his first house in July, August of 26, and by the time the 7th house eclipses start to exercise, even then, when the North Node eclipses go over the 8th house and the 7th house, a lot of focus is on partnerships. It is my first indicator for marriage, divorce, recommitment, looking at resources, how to manage them within the family or with a partner or a spouse. As I said, it could be investors. When it's the 8th house, it could be moving in with family. It could be getting external help, managing things to correct income. And sometimes people release a job, release their income temporarily. When the eclipses move into the 7th house, you can actually see divorce papers being filed, or someone pops the question, or the partnerships get sealed or written up or contracted, or if someone has been leaning into partners or spouses' income, by the time once the eclipses start to move into the 7th house, they start to look for other partnerships, professional partnerships, that they can build on. And then when the North Node eclipses move into the 6th house, your work and your health gets redefined. It's an arc, it's a narrative. So while Trump and Vance have an exposure and a strength as we head into October, as time goes on, the charts are hardly poised for visibility and leadership, unless that visibility and leadership is going to rely heavily on some type of a board, investors, partnerships, strong alliances that they're going to want to form. Now, depending on which side of the political spectrum you sit on, you may view these alliances as strong, or you may view these alliances as dangerous. But it is not, there isn't a great deal in their charts that is suggesting that it's time for them after the end of the first week of June of next year. There isn't a great deal that's suggesting that after the end of the first week of June of next year, that it is time for them to strike out on their own and take the limelight and be the leader. Harris's chart, weak and quiet in October. As time goes on, and it's quiet in October because, and especially as we head towards the 16th, it is time for her to purge something. It could be visibility towards people who've been working behind the scenes against her. It could be 12th house stuff. It could be a moment of quiet retirement, a moment of taking a step back as she heads towards this full moon in a few days. And you might say, why are you harping on about a full moon? It's just a full moon, not an eclipse. I'm harping on about the full moon because ever since 2016, it is the full moon in Taurus that has been the indicator for me as to which way a result may go. Even when I look at things like Oscar races and Emmy races, I'm always curious about where are people's full moons? It's a temporary visibility. It's a kind of a closure. But in fairness, if you're going to have your full moon in the 12th house, the new moon was in the 6th. So for Harris, it is a time of, November is a month of contemplating service, job, planting seeds, health, self-care. A full moon in the 1st in the middle of Gemini is temporary visibility or assertiveness, sometimes a tantrum, for lack of a better word. Whenever someone has a full moon in the 1st house, I'm always like, beware the tantrum. If you have been in a situation where someone has been pushing your buttons or not obeying your boundaries or been treating you respectfully, beware a full moon in the 1st or the 2nd house, because you may be at a point where you're just like, you may be in mic drop mode, turn around and walk out and shut the door and lock it and throw away the key, kind of. It's a full moon of a meltdown or dramatic exit, or at least assertiveness. So December and January. Now, as her North Node eclipses move into the 10th house and then the 9th house, if we view the election results that we've just had as conclusive, it could just mean that she makes some sort of a change or a shift. She has a Gemini rising, so her new year is going to start around May the 22nd. And between January 22nd and April the 22nd, she is going to be planting seeds, preparing for that new year. So it could be that once she's done dusting herself off, she thinks about, okay, what's next? Where am I going to next? And she manages to attain some sort of position or go to some place or go into a place. Keep in mind that Trump's 10th house eclipses occurred after he lost the 2020 election. But it was during that time that he declared which direction he wanted to go in and was given the opportunity to move in a certain direction again. In some ways, Trump's cycle after 2020, 2021 to now, is kind of similar, so at least as far as the eclipses, to where Harris is going now. By the time the 2024 election comes along, Harris's chart is going to be moving in more towards partnership. But the Pisces eclipses, even though we've had the first of those on September the 17th of this year, become more undiluted, become stronger the more we get past the March 29th Aries eclipse and the end of the first week of June of next year. Until the end of the first week of June of next year, Trump is still contemplating what he wants to do next in the direction that he's wanted. If there's a direction that has been close to his heart, that he feels he was here and born to do something, he has been wanting to move in that direction since March, April of 2023, had his setbacks with regard to what to do and what not to, and now till the end of the first week of June, he gets to move towards something in his goals, some direction that he desires. What is unclear to me is when we're looking at these 9th house North Node eclipses, what puzzles me is that it's not as prominent necessarily as a presidency. It's typically a shift from what you've been doing to where you want to go. But in Harris's case, the eclipses start to move towards the 10th. They already did between July and if you look at when she started to gain a certain amount of prominence and came into the race, we were looking at the Pisces North Node eclipses being prominent in her chart. And right now, If you were to say, Abhi, as far as the eclipses are concerned, where are we? Well, we are under the most direct shadow of the Libra South Node eclipse on October the 2nd and the week before after December the 2nd, which is a South Node eclipse in her 5th house of prominence and stardom. Temporarily, she needs to be an ensemble player. Temporarily, she needs to continue to lean into her friends, her networks, her social circles have been pulling her out of the doldrums since March, April of 2023 and been providing. She may continue to lean into, if she has had a network that has been grooming her to run for this election, gradually gaining in assertiveness, then she continues to determine how to navigate that and how to tap into that until the end of the first week of June of next year. And it means that you have to release, because you're playing as part of a group, you have to release the 5th house prominence for that period of time. After the end of the first week of June, Harris's chart is wants to give her career-related opportunities that can both allow her to feel like she has checked certain things off her list, but then the experience of which propel her forward after 2026 to move in a different direction. That's just the way the charts work. Whatever I say for Vance applies for, or Trump applies for Vance as well. They both have the same rising sign. They both have full moons in Taurus. And Vance's midheaven is, not quite on top of Algol or where as Trump's, but it's maybe another 4 or 5 degrees past it. Now, this conjunction to Algol in Trump's chart, Trump's case, fixed stars are such a boondoggle as far as I'm concerned. I mean, you can look at someone like Astrology King's website. He does, I think, try to do as comprehensive a job as he possibly can talking about the fixed stars. And my understanding is, I've never met him. I don't really know him. My understanding, at least in looking at, is that fixed stars are a focus for him. I still struggle with fixed stars because, as I said, I am looking for interpretations. Because I'm a skeptical astrologer, I want to see consistency. I see consistency in the way Saturn acts. I see consistency in the way Jupiter acts. I consistency in the way eclipses occur for people's charts. The reason why I remain an astrologer is because it astonishes me. The sheer number of Sagittarius rising charts that I have done readings for this week, every week it is one rising sign that has a certain kind of prominence. And it's technically, as far as the transits are concerned, a similar interpretation, and it is a non-stop source of amazement to me. That with exactitude, not vagueness, those transits can apply with as much variety as they do for everybody. So if I've read X number of Sagittarius rising charts, and if for the first 25, 30 minutes, 40 minutes of my reading, I have interpreted the chart without knowing anything about the client, which tends to be the way I like to work, I'm astonished by the fact that as we then start to piece it together, I'm just like, and it's not vague. It's not one of these things. And this is the reason why I do it. This is the reason why I say, ideally, I don't want to know anything. Let's just see how this goes. Let me interpret it. And it's not one of the things that we have to stretch into place. That way no one can accuse me, because I've certainly had experiences where I might have done something with the reader and so many questions get asked that I'm just like, are you actually reading, or are you just basing this off of my responses? But with the fixed stars, not enough people, the interpretation is still ancient medieval. I just wonder with the fixed stars as we get to this, does some sort of visibility come to this quote unquote or real assassination attempt on the 15th of July, where Mars was at that point at the full moon. It certainly brought Trump a certain amount of prominence. For some people, the algol connection is demonic. But surely Trump is not the only person who has his midheaven conjunct algol. And surely everybody who has their midheaven within 2 or 3 degrees or 4 degrees of algol is not a demon. It's like, for some people, algol gives protection. For some people, it indicates a blow to the head. I will just say with the algol connection, energetically, my experience at that point when I look, because with the fixed stars, with anything, I first look at it for a certain period of time in my own chart. And what I will say about the algol connection is, just don't lose it with this woman. Don't get to a place where you do something that comes back to hurt you. Don't be rash. And there's a lot of that going with the Mars-Pluto opposition, with this full moon conjunct algol, that has glorious aspects around it. Glorious. It's trining Pluto. The Sun trines Neptune. Mars trines the North Node from the first house. I mean, if that is not, if you look at Mars is in Leo in their first house, trining the North Node in the 9th house. Taking action to go towards the direction that you want to go towards. For Harris, Leo is in her 3rd house, and the North Node is going over the 11th house. See, it's a much more social. Is she talking to people? Is she connecting to people? Is she... Now, the 11th house is the house of altruism, and it is the house of public service, insofar as it helps the collective. Look, guys, when I did those 2 videos, we're at the 42-minute mark. I don't want to keep going on and on and on in this direction. Let me start to bring this home, and let me start to summarize things. When I did those videos, when this whole question of Harris entering the race came up, I said at that time, it's not a slam dunk. It's not a slam dunk. And what I meant by that is, everything that was being said was, by introducing Harris into the race, it would make it a slam dunk in Harris's favor. And I said, it is not a slam dunk. What is an open question is whether whatever is done by November 22nd is considered complete, and everything that follows builds on it. Or everything that happens by November the 22nd is a milestone still, with developments to follow at least to the middle to the end of April of next year, if not the end of the first week of June. Some part and focus of Trump's presidency, if he takes office, is going to be towards sorting out his own financial matters. And debts and challenges, and stabilizing that part of the chart. The other thing that gives him power to do that is that the North Node is moving into the 8th house. So it will likely ask him to lean into that part of the chart it will find him partners and investors and board members and the equivalent of VC money. Now, if for some reason he does not take office, and between January and March of this year, or the early months of any of the success, of 26, he has to release his job for some reason, then he may seek shelter with partners who can support him temporarily while he corrects himself. The question of mortality is also there with Saturn going over, with all this focus on the 8th house. But that interpretation is not as neat and clean and straightforward. The only reason why I'm even presenting it is because of his age. At this point in time, is it a straightforward transit interpretation? That he needs to take matters related to his mortality and his longevity seriously if something arises. I can't interpret that with the same intensity for Vance, who is significantly younger, for example. If what holds by November the 22nd holds, then Trump's is the stronger chart. If what happens in November is only part of the story and there's more to develop, as we head at least to the middle to the end of April, then Harris's chart gains strength. Interestingly, in both Trump's and Vance's case, the North Node eclipses in Pisces take us to 27. The North Node eclipses in Aquarius start up in 26 and take us to, I would imagine, 28 or so. And in 28, the eclipses move into the 6th house where work gets redefined. If Vance is in office, and by the time it gets to 28, you could interpret it as him running for president at that time, if that is where things go. But the first question is, and this is true for all of us, my darlings, where do we end up by the end of the first week of June of next year? I would, if it's not in your power of control, I would go into observation mode. It's not a slam dunk that the election is just going to be, when you go into a Mercury retrograde, whatever has been gained typically before Mercury goes retrograde is often just present. It's done. It's every inch gained. And Leo rising charts are becoming, because the 8th house for Leo rising charts has been such a source of sensitivity, Saturn's entry into them and the North Node eclipses heading in that direction after the 9th house, there is a strength. The only thing in Trump's case that gives me pause is his own behavior and his own actions with Saturn in the 8th and the consequences of those, the mounting fees, you pissed this judge off, they fined you another $20,000 or $1 million, and you pissed so-and-so off, and there was another fine, and there was another, everything you should not do with Saturn over the 8th, it seemed like he was just doing. Now, you could interpret that, yeah, he was doing, but at the same time, he was thinking about a certain way of handling all of this and sorting out and stabilizing the 8th house as well. Where a Leo rising chart finds weakness is if some sort of financial crisis occurs and someone is no longer able to sustain where they are at. They may need to have a kind of a collapse and rely on partner, family resources to correct themselves in 2025 and 2026. But where they have the ability to stabilize the 8th house in a way that helps them to move in the direction that they want to move in, based on the direction they've articulated as the eclipse has moved into the 9th house from March, April 23 to the end of the first week of June of 25. Then they can use the 8th house to create the investor partnership, board, handshake, contract component to help them solidify and sort out the sensitivities in the 8th house that they have been experiencing. The Mercury retrograde that is going to come up in the fifth house is coming up, fifth house for Trump and Vance. Prominence, stardom. Does it bring up something? And remember, from the Sagittarius part of the chart, there's a square to Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Does something about stardom and prominence and being a solo player and being the king and Mercury going retrograde there, something come up there that compromises their ability to stabilize the Pisces part of the chart? Mars is retrograde between the 12th and the 1st for Trump and Vance. And the Pisces, Aries, Mercury, and Venus retrograde, I said I was done, in March, April, indicates that something really, there's a cycle that needs to end to allow them to land firmly in the Leo part of the chart by the middle to the end of April. And some things need to be closed out in the 8th house so they can land into the 9th house securely by the end of the first week of April. But again, when we were talking about Mars going back into the 12th house, we're talking about the presence of hidden enemies again from their chart's perspective. It is possible that the results that we're seeing now are conclusive, and whatever's going to follow, or it's going to follow built on that. It could be that Harris moves in a different direction altogether in a certain sense and tries to get what she can based on the direction she's in. For the next couple of years, she may take on a certain position, something along those lines. It could be that if whatever has happened by November 22nd is not conclusive, and whether as a result of this upcoming full moon or gradually in December, January, February, things emerge that indicate a possible reversal or challenges, then Harris's chart does become potentially stronger. But as I've said all along, for all of us, some things for each of us individually need to be sorted out by the middle to the end of April. And for those of us who have Mercury direct in our birth charts, that even to the end of the first week of June of next year. 52 minutes in, I'm going to leave it at that. I did feel like, and I kind of wanted to do it this way because, again, it gives you a sense of how to look at charts and how to interpret and how to, it doesn't, what needs to happen as a, the next thing I feel like I should do is take a look at the chart of the United States of America, but we're going to leave that alone. That's not the kind of channel this is. My next video, I want that video to be about this full moon in Taurus, conjunct Algol and trine Pluto. But it would have been hard for me to do that full moon without continually referring to Trump's chart. So I was just like, let me get this out of the way, considering the timing of where we're at and what we've just dealt with over the past week and blah, 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 blah. Whichever way different views of this channel align. And actually, in that spirit, I would just say, please don't, it's such a divisive time, such a challenging time. Don't leave political comments. I said that even back then when I did those 2 videos, and you guys were great. You did not. You did not. Nobody did. Nobody went into pros and cons. Nobody went into any of that. I would just respectfully ask, don't do it, because it just keeps this channel then focused on what it needs to be focused on, which is chart interpretation. Thank you to those of you. I did write to a few people. I am running this special for a certain number of people, especially those if you're living in the United States or Canada or the EU, where you can get a regular 60 to 75 minute reading with me for $100. Everybody I wrote to yesterday who had expressed interest but not committed has gotten back to me. So thank you for that. That helps me know how many slots are still available and all that kind of good stuff. So thank you for that. If you are interested in getting a regular reading for me, 60 to 75 minutes, where I go through different transits in your chart, etc., then you can email me using the email address below. And it is a significant enough discount for people living in Canada or the EU or the United States. So just know that. at a certain amount, once I reach the number, I will cut that off and cap it. So you can use that email address to get in touch with me. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. Know that I don't typically do videos like this. I just wanted to go ahead and get this out there. Next to the subscribe button, bell icon, hover over it, wiggly bell on top, click on it, and you'll be notified when I do new videos. There's a thanks button underneath this video. You can use that to contribute to the channel. Comment, like the video, keep the comments politics free or bias free. We all have our biases, right? But it gives videos greater circulation on YouTube, and I will leave it at that. The next video we're going to look at the full moon in Taurus, a lot of which you already know what I'm going to say. And you know, I've been saying the full moon is on the 16th, but it's actually Pacific time. It's on the 15th, in the middle of the day on the 15th, firmly in the 15th Pacific time. So it's November the 11th today, and you know, for all intents and purposes, certainly by tomorrow, by day after tomorrow, by Wednesday, we're going to be wrapped up in that full moon. So I will get that video out. But there's enough content already. It's a full moon conjunct Uranus, trining Pluto, Sun trines Neptune, Mars trining the North Node, getting ready to Mercury trining Chiron, Mercury opposing Jupiter, poised before the Mercury retrograde. Which makes me think, from a Mercury in the 5th house perspective, with this full moon, certain things may be conclusive, but certain things, especially with Mercury opposing Jupiter and Mercury trining Chiron, are poised for Mercury to make those transits 3 times. We will interpret all that when we look at the full moon video. All right, thank you. Take care.